guys, welcome back. As promised, RS100 motor build. Going over some of the stuff that I'm doing, some of the stuff that I've done to this point, and possibly throw the motor together tonight to mess around with. So, without further ado, as you see on the table here, this is all of my last couple weeks of creation going on. We'll start with the piston. That right there is your stock RS100 piston. By comparison, this is an 80s MX100 piston. And then there's the piston that I'm using. This is a KX100 piston. I had to weld up the oiling holes for the cylinder bridge. That was a bit of a chore. So as you can see, the compression height going from this one to this one is quite a bit lower than the compression height going from this one to this one. The pin height is actually the same on both of these from here to here, which is neat, but the compression height drops again even more. And the reason for that is at higher RPM, that higher compression height creates instability in the piston. So I kind of have set around 12K red line for this thing, like on paper. We'll see if it'll breathe that far so that it can rev up that high. But yeah, this should help keep it together a little bit longer. One of the forums I post on Two Stroke World, one guy said he was revving one of these style pistons up to 12K and it split right across. So this is a nice Wiseco forged. It should last pretty good. Then next up, in order to make that actually work, obviously with the lower compression height, I needed some way to make up for that. This is the stock rod, and that is the new rod. So this is a KTM 100 SX rod. It's a Pro X rod that I assembled into the RS100 crank halves. It shares the same size pin. I did have to turn down the end of the pin to the right diameter, or sorry, the right length, because it was too long. Also, I had to increase the web width. So Yamaha calls for a spec of 50 millimeters across the web width, and in order to get enough side clearance for the rod, I bumped this up to 51 millimeters. Yamaha normally uses shims on either side of the crank in the crank halves in between on the bearing. So I just have to make some custom shims or grind down the shims provided to make that work. But that'll give me a 10 millimeter increase in rod length over the OEM Yamaha rod. A little bit beefier of a rod, and that'll increase the dwell at top and bottom dead center, which messes with the port timing a bit. Interestingly enough, with just the rod and the KX piston, these were the port timings I got for just the long rod and the KX piston in the bore. Notice the exhaust duration 206. That's pretty up there. And then I decked 1 millimeter off of the cylinder, which brought me to 186, and then I ported it up to well, here I'll just flip to the numbers that I've got for the final porting. Next up in the equation, I had to make so the RS100 cylinder. There's a few different options, really. You can use a bunch of different cylinders. Yamaha was really good about this in the 70s. Basically, if it's 100cc, most of them are bolt-on and the same, with the exception of the YZs. They use the slightly bigger cylinder spacing Now you can put one of those YZ100 cylinders, the early ones, onto one of these bikes if you get a set of DT125 cases. They have the bigger bolt spacing here. This is slightly wider and slightly wider here. And then you could actually make like a Screamer 120 or 100 motor. But with the standard cases, you cannot. So this guy, unfortunately, Yamaha makes this quite small. It uses a much smaller reed block than the MX100. So this is actually a DT175 reed block, and these are YZ125 single pedal 30 thou reeds. Did have to trim the edges. You can do that with just a very nice sharp pair of scissors. It's really not hard to do, but the screw holes are the same, the length is correct, so they'll bolt onto these reed cages, and then you just trim. I just laid the stock reeds over it and used those as a guide, put the screws in through both of them, and then just trimmed down the edges, and it came out pretty good. That one got a little away from me, but that's fine. So with this spacer now, see, if you put it in there, it hits in that where it tapers in to go into the cylinder. So with this spacer on there, it allows me to put this on there. This is the same, this is the same reeds block style that the MX100 used, the good one, like 73, 74, which apparently was like 16 horsepower. So that should be pretty good. I'm also using the DT175 boot. Unfortunately, mine had a little damage there, but it has like a somewhat of a stuffer built into it. I'm probably going to go in and just clean this up with like a buffing wheel or something. Try and make it a little nicer on the inside, but that's the boot that I'm using. And over here, I did some mock-up with transmission stuff. So I have found that you can I can use the larger clutch out of an MX100 on the RS100. I tried stuffing the DT175 transmission in there, and while it did fit, the clutch rubbed the outer cover, so I would need to put a spacer, which I don't have currently. That may be a future thing. If this clutch doesn't hold up, I'm definitely going to do it. It all fits in. The transmission fits in out of the DT175. So it is a possibility to do very easily. I'll have to make up a aluminum spacer that goes on here that kicks this cover out a bit more, and then it's a much beefier clutch with many more plates. I think it's 5 or 6 plates in the DT175 clutch. This is only 4. One other neat thing I found is I could put a the MX100 or the DT175 use the same drum style. The RS100 uses a slightly longer nub at this end and then has a clip that goes across it to hold it and retain it from moving around. This one actually uses the cases to keep the drum from moving out into the clutch area. And this would actually reverse the shift pattern, which I thought would be kind of neat. But unfortunately, without a little bit of work, I can't make this directly work in the RS100 cases. So that's for maybe motor 2. I might try messing around with a reverse shift drum. Everything works the same. I put it in there and I tested it out. It's just the shift pattern is reversed because these use a weird linkage system down on the shifter. So there's an input shaft that goes into a linkage, and then the linkage goes to the shift detent fork system that goes onto the shift pawls here and moves the drum. So that was kind of neat, something that I found out today. So yeah, that's pretty much all of my progress on the motor. So let's slam this bad boy together, and I'll show a few clips of some stuff along the way. So that's pretty much it for this episode tonight. We got the bottom end put together, and I can check squish. Got the reed block on, transmission together. Next video will probably do all the clutch side stuff. I have to modify the piston by moving one of the ring pins over about 15 degrees because it's in the middle of a port right now, and I have to finish honing the cylinder. So yeah, stay tuned for the next video. Until then, take care.